has gathered with our Prime Minister to support Ukraine.
This, of course, comes after Friday, where the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, faced a dressing down in front of the world's media by President Trump and his Vice President, J.D. Vance. This is what happened.
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the President for trying to bring it into this conference.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you see what problems we have?
I have been to...
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President.
So that was Vice President J.D. Vance, and things then got heated. Donald Trump stepped in. Here's what happened.
We're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
Feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't have to play cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country.
I've ever seen anything like that, ever. In over 40 years of journalism, ever. I mean, I'm sure it goes on behind the scenes, but it's not normally conducted. And I did feel that he sent in the Vice President as his bully boy to rough him up.
Do you?
Yeah, I think they're good cop, bad cop, and then Trump piled in too.
That was to the end of 50 minutes of debate, which I like the fact that they're doing it in public rather than behind closed doors, because I think it shows a transparency from the Trump administration. They are not hiding anything. They said they were going to run on a ticket of being more open and honest with the American public, and they're certainly doing that. Zelensky sat there like he was in his PE kit in the headmaster's office getting a telling off. But until that point, Trump had been patient, he'd been calm, Zelensky was rolling his eyes, he was looking shifty, he wasn't really listening. And what they took objection to is they'd clearly made a deal behind the scenes about Trump being able to access these raw materials, these minerals which Ukraine have, which we need in computing and various technologies. They'd made that deal, and then Zelensky went out in front of the world's media and basically tried to force them into a position where they would agree to offering protection for Ukraine into the future. And that means making Ukraine a member of NATO. That is the red line in the sand for Putin.
Well, it doesn't have to go that far. What he wanted was a commitment from America, which Britain is trying to get to, and the whole meeting yesterday was about to get what they call a security protection. That's not NATO. There's no way Ukraine's going into NATO. He's not getting that, and the European leaders who gathered yesterday know that too. But they want to have some form of security. But here's the thing. They'll get it the moment the mineral deal is signed, because Trump won't want Russians going anywhere near his minerals.
That's not it. I don't see it like that at all. No, it's not that, because what Trump kept saying repeatedly in that whole 50 minutes was, we need peace, and J.D. Vance was saying the same thing. We just want death to stop. We want these people to stop dying. And Zelensky was effectively saying that wasn't important to him. He was just saying, we need a backstop, we need protection from you. And you could see Trump getting more and more wound up. He was very patient, he was very gracious with him. And then when J.D. Vance stepped in, quite rightly in my opinion, and said to him, show some gratitude, we're trying to save your country. Zelensky is not shifting one inch on this in terms of a compromise. He won't even enter into a conversation as to what that looks like. Without any clear strategic aim and any clear objective of how to get there, this will go on for years, because Biden had no clear strategic aim, and it's been a disaster for 3 years. It was quite obvious that the two of them in America, they just want it to end.
Yeah, but you're left at the end of it thinking that Trump and the vice presidents think that Putin's the good guy here.
I didn't think that. And he kept,
I do.
but do you know what? One of the reporters asked him. One of the reporters said, "Whose side are you on?" He said to Donald Trump, "Are you on Zelensky's side or are you on Putin's side?" And Donald Trump said, "I am on neither side because I can't be on a side if I have to broker this deal."
Yeah.
And that is absolutely correct. If you are mediating some sort of situation, you have to be as objective as possible. And he knows that Putin's watching.
But also, he did say initially when they were in Saudi Arabia, no, Ukraine's not involved in the talks. Come on, Ukraine has to be involved in the talks. It's their country.
But he had him there in the room.
Invaded.
He's clearly involving him in the talks. He said he hasn't sat in that room with Putin.
And I don't think he'd speak to Putin like that. I
We
guarantee
don't.
it.
Look,
I
kind of
guarantee
who
it.
cares?
I do. I care a lot.
Yeah, but who cares how he speaks to Putin?
Because
Who cares how he speaks to Zelensky? We just want them
Putin
to
invaded
achieve
Ukraine.
peace.
Putin invaded Ukraine, and his troops are still there.
It's not that simple.
It's a big one, Bobby Belter, as we call it. Let's start with the Observer, though, first. The headline reads, "Royal welcome for Zelensky after White House meltdown." Keir Starmer, it was a stark contrast, wasn't it, to the chaos in the Oval Office yesterday. JD Vance and Trump absolutely berating Zelensky. Meanwhile, in Downing Street, there was hugs, pattings on the back, and I think they went off for a nice posh dinner somewhere as well. You are very welcome to number 10, says Keir Starmer. He also said, by the way, I'm going to say this now, he also said that Zelensky, to his face, that he has support of everybody across Britain. I don't know who he's speaking for, because Labour won, what was it, Paul? What percent of the vote? 30-something% of the vote? Less than Jeremy Corbyn. So I don't know why the Prime Minister thinks he can talk on behalf of all Britons, because I'm sure there are some who disagree with
the majority, though, to be fair.
The majority?
The majority.
What, lower votes than Corbyn is the majority, is it?
No,
I rest my case. We move on to the Sunday Times. Rachel Reeves unlocks billions for Kyiv and UK defence. We did just discuss that. Tonight she has announced a loan deal with Ukraine, signing £2.5 billion, just under, worth of loans to Ukraine for the military effort. It's coming, interestingly, from frozen Russian assets in the UK and the diversion of funds towards green projects in the UK. And here's the big one. The Mail on Sunday. Now stop the state's visits for bully, quote-unquote, Trump, amid the outrage over the US president's humiliation of Zelensky, and as the king hosts Ukraine leader at Sandringham tomorrow, today, Sunday, MPs and top brass demand the state visit offered to Donald Trump this week by Prime Minister Keir Starmer should be rescinded. Top MPs and military brass are calling for it to be taken away. Charlotte Griffiths, who is the editor-at-large of the Mail on Sunday, joins us in the studio now. Charlotte, good evening. Good story. Surprising.
Yeah, quite surprising.
From your lot.
But in the way, possibly from my lot, it's quite surprising. But it also is completely logical, because how can he meet Zelensky today and then go to? He's supposed to be meeting him in Balmoral in Scotland for a pre-state visit get together,
Right.
and then again for another state visit. So it would be completely unfair to require this of the king, because he's being asked to switch his allegiance. We know privately that he really does support Ukraine. He's spoken about it in the past. It makes no sense. He's going to have to stall for time on this one.
So the top brass include former Defence Minister Tobias Ellwood, Linda, Dickie Arbiter, who was a spokesman for the late Queen. Dickie's a very good top royal commentator. I think Dickie's daughter works in the US.
She does. She works for CBS, I think.
Yeah.
It's one of the American networks.
And ex-MI6 head Richard Dearlove. They've all said that Trump's state visit to the UK should be rescinded.
Here's Morgan, who says he's had far worse shouting matches with Trump.
And with you.
I was going to say, there's very few people...
Hang on, are we just going to ignore the fact I haven't been here for 1,453 days?
No, we're not going to
Do I
ignore
not
that
even
fact.
get a hug?
No, apparently...
Come on.
No, what?
Oh, come on.
No, I don't want a hug.
Come on, come on,
God,
come on.
okay.
Come on.
He's gonna get done.
I was going to say...
I haven't been here for 1,453 days.
No, we're not going to
Do I
ignore
not
that
even
fact.
get a hug?
No, apparently...
Come on.
No, what?
Come on.
No, I don't want a hug.
Come on,
Oh,
come on,
God,
come on.
Okay, yeah.
Come on.
I was going to say...
Come on, come on, mate. We don't mind.
Apparently...
Come on.
No, what?
Come on.
No, I don't want a hug.
Come on,
Oh,
come on,
God,
come on.
okay, yeah.
Come on.
I was going to say...
Come on, mate. We don't mind hugging.
Yeah,
Look, you've moved on so fast, haven't you?
I've got a couple of new husbands
Moved
now.
on so fast.
She doesn't hug me either.
No, I don't do hugs, as you know. I've locked horns with you, Piers
Yes,
Morgan,
you have, Suzanne Marie.
on many an occasion.
Yes, you have.
But you have locked horns with President Trump Friday was a disaster, optically, in the White House. But you must have sat there watching, thinking, I've had worse blow-ups of President Trump, and the next minute he's on the phone telling me I'm welcome to play golf.
Well, he was actually on the phone that morning.
Yeah. So did you wind him up so much on Friday morning?
I'm trying to
that
think
he was
what
then in
I said. I mean, it was quite funny. I was in a black cab in London, and my phone goes. I could see I have him under DJT in my phone. DJT. It was flashing up. I thought, should I take it in a cab? It was like, I thought, we can't not take a call from the president. So Mr. President, I'm just looking at the cab driver's eyes like that. And we spoke for about 15 minutes.
Do you have him on speaker in the cab?
No.
Okay.
But obviously I was talking in a way that was giving a few clues. And the cab driver said, Peirce, I don't want to prime it. He said, but was that Donald Trump? I said, actually it was. And he said, God, he said, I've been driving cabs a long time. I said, I've never had anyone talking to the President of the United States in back of my cab before. So it's quite funny. But anyway, Trump was in a very good, upbeat mood. I had a long chat with him about a number of things. I've talked about Ukraine with him a number of times. And the one thing I think is always important with Donald Trump, and you put your finger on it, I've had screaming matches with him, literally. And then an hour later, we're laughing and joking, doing a fun interview. Literally, I had that two and a half years ago. So I always think with him, focus on what he does, not what he says, or the general drama and chaos. And secondly, understand that this is almost uniquely in modern times a Republican president in America who wants peace, not war. I mean, he hasn't, in his first term, declared war anywhere. He wants to end the two wars that are raging right now in Ukraine and Israel. And I think, although it was all very unedifying, although it shouldn't have happened, if you actually watch the whole press conference with Zelensky, and I interviewed Zelensky 2 weeks ago, I had a long chat with him, so I got where his mindset was on this. If you watch the whole thing, you're actually getting to the nub of where this peace deal is likely to end up. And that's, to me, a bit of squabbling in front of the cameras shouldn't have happened. But let's not overreact. Focus on the big picture, which is how do we get to peace.
You were straight out on Twitter in the minutes after that interview, when everybody else was saying it's a disaster. You came out and said, no, there's going to be a deal. Was that because you just knew that's what Trump is about? Or was it something he'd said to you in that phone call on the Friday which made you think, don't overinterpret this bust-up?
I think a bit of all of that. I mean, I think that I had a chat with him just before the inauguration. We had a long chat on the phone, and he talked about Ukraine specifically in that. The Pentagon had said to him that in the previous 6 weeks, 100,000 people had been killed on the battlefield, Ukraine and Russia side. And he said, can you believe the numbers? This is like First World War. You know, this is like the worst imaginable kind of killing going on. He said, we have to end this. So I genuinely do think he wants peace. Now, what's he doing with Putin? Again, it's very interesting. I found an old clip. Someone tweeted it to me yesterday. Bill Clinton, who I interviewed about 10 years ago, talking about when he dealt with Vladimir Putin. And he said that the way he used to deal with him was in public, respectful, don't attack him, don't criticize him too much. Behind the scenes, get very tough. And he said, when we reach points of agreement, interestingly, he said, Putin never went back on his word to me. Now, when you listen to what Trump says, he's saying all the time, Vladimir hasn't done this to me, right? So it's very personal for him. The interaction with Russian leader, American leader for Trump is personal. He's betting the bank, I think, in this peace deal, that when it comes to it, the minerals deal, which I think is really smart, because it gets Trump's MAGA base off his back, right? He can say, look, it's not costing us money. In fact, we're making money, so don't worry about that. And he thinks by having a lot of Americans mining for minerals in Ukraine on a permanent basis, Vladimir Putin will not attack Ukraine. Zelensky, I think, is concerned, that's fine while Donald Trump is in charge, what happens after that? Yeah. And I think that is where they've got to, which is, what are the security guarantees?
When Sir Keir Starmer was there on Thursday, he was seen to have played an absolute blinder. You know, he flourishes this royal letter from the King, personally signed, and you could almost see Donald Trump purring as he takes it and asks the Prime Minister to read it. Calls today for that to be rescinded, torn up, cancelled. How important is that meeting to Donald Trump? How much does he adore the royal family? Would a threat of rescinding it mean anything at all? And can we leverage it to say, that meeting's not going to happen for a while.
Well, it could. Look,
until you give security guarantees.
we can play games with Trump and we can threaten him and all this. It won't make any difference.
What does make a difference?
Well, I spoke to him about the royal visit. He was incredibly honoured on Friday morning when we spoke.
Wouldn't play games with that, will he?
No, look, of course, every Prime Minister wants to leverage that relationship. I've got to say, I was surprised by the stick you guys were all giving Keir Starmer. I think he's played a blinder here. I think the way he conducted himself with Trump was a template in how to do it. I think the offering of a second state visit was playing to Trump's obvious love of the royal family. His mother was born in Scotland, raised there till she was 18. You know, they watched the coronation on television. You know, I've had a long chat with Trump about the royals many times, and he's a big, big royal fan. So the question then becomes, what is in our interest here? It's not just about Ukraine's interest, it's about our national interest too. The most interesting aspect of the last week for me, two things. Keir Starmer seems to have found his mojo as a Prime Minister, which I'm pleased to see, after a pretty rocky start, let's be honest. Secondly, the UK seems to be leading in Europe for the first time since Brexit. And I'm very pleased about that too.
Yes.
So we should be, I think, pleased to see our Prime Minister leading the European thing. And Starmer's a smart guy. He knows from Trump. Trump, quite rightly, believes the Europeans have not stepped up enough in their defence. We haven't. No other European country has. We're now stepping up more. Trump will respect that. But Trump's absolutely right. Look at the NATO spending pie. Why should America, if you're the Americans, this is how they think, why should America keep bailing us out, keep funding all the military operations way more than everybody else? And I think that's the key for the tension.
Can I ask a little bit more about those
You can ask
conversations?
me whatever you like, Susanna.
Yeah.
Go back a long way.
We do. I'm trying not to remember those particular moments.
Give me an eye roll for old time's sake. Come on.
I want to ask about those conversations you have with President Trump. Why does he ring you? What's his purpose?
Well, he rang me recently just to say he thought I was looking really good on TV, which is perfectly understandable. I do.
Has he not got better people to call about
Obviously
more
not.
important issues?
I'm sorry he doesn't ring you, but he obviously prefers ringing me. Look, I've known him 20 years. You know, remember, I've known him a long
I
time.
think you look great, but so does Susanna.
Okay, that's not the material point.
I would
here.
never,
The point
I would
is-
never objectify her like that, Ed. I have to be honest.
okay. he is the key player in world affairs, and he's ringing you
So am I.
and saying, "You look great. What's your workout plan?"
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
And then you extend that conversation for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, I can imagine you'd happily talk about yourself for 15 minutes, Piers. But surely the US president has a few more bon mots you can share with us.
Well, what did we talk about on front? We talked about Keir Starmer. He really liked Keir Starmer, which I was surprised. He said, look, we're not natural political bedfellows at all, obviously. He said, but I find him a straight shooter. I like him. He said, and he had a good time with him at the White House. He was very thrilled and honoured about the state visit. And look, with Trump, you either kiss the ring a bit or you choose deliberately not to. We all know he responds well to flattery. If he's the most powerful man in the world, which he is, it is pretty foolhardy of any country, frankly, to say to him, you know what, we're going to rough you up a bit. And my only advice for President Zelensky, who I think is an absolute hero, and I've interviewed him several times, and I think the guy and his country are amazing, and no one will bow to no one in my admiration. But the thing about President Zelensky in that moment was he just took the bait a bit, especially from J.D. Vance. And my advice before would have been to him, stay calm, be very grateful. Remember that a lot of the base conservative MAGA movement do not like the amount of money that's being spent in Ukraine because they want it spent on domestic issues in America.
That J.D. Vance point is, though, really interesting, because in the first term, I don't remember Donald Trump ever being in the room and kind of deferring a bit, whereas now we have Elon Musk.
Yeah.
On Friday, we had J.D. Vance kind of stepping in. It was actually J.D. Vance who picked the fight with Zelensky. It's a different kind of Trump.
Well, I'll tell you
who's
what's
allowing
well,
these
here's what's
guys to be big egos around.
Here's what's different with Trump, which I've really noticed, because I've spoken to him maybe 6-7 times since he got shot, and including a week after. I think he's a bit of a change guy in his head. Not in the rhetoric, he's the same guy, but in his head, I think he really believes he got a second chance at life. He came within half an inch of getting assassinated. You know, his ear got grazed. Think about that, with an AR-15 bullet would have taken his brains out. So I think he feels that. I also think with the presidency, he had 4 years in the wilderness, right, wondering would he ever get another chance at this. This time, he's hit the ground spectacularly hard in terms of initiative after initiative after initiative, 200 executive orders. I want peace in the Middle East. I want peace in Ukraine. This is a man on a mission for his legacy. And I think you have to, again, contextualise Trump with that in mind.
Is J.D. Vance
wants
chosen successor, though?
Well, I think he'd like to be. And he's certainly, look, J.D.
Vance would like that, but does Trump want J.D. Vance to be?
Well, he said directly he wasn't going to give him his endorsement yet, but that's not surprising.
1 minute after 9 on Monday, March the 3rd. Your opportunity is to put your call to the leader of Reform UK as they continue to perform well in the polls. Nigel Farage. I've got many questions, but let's go straight to the calls. Thank you for being here, Mr. Farage.
Good morning.
I will put some questions to you when I can, but Pierre is in Brent with the first question. Pierre, go ahead. You're through to Nigel Farage. Morning, Pierre.
Good morning, Nigel.
Morning.
I just wanted to put forward, in regards to the Chagos Islands, I know you really believe that Trump was going to completely block the Chagos Island deal with Keir Starmer, and I wanted to know how you got it so wrong, and Trump's obviously going ahead and backing it.
This is as it is revealed according to the Mauritian Prime Minister, or Mauritius sources. It could be sent to Mauritius for final approval, Nigel Farage.
Well, Trump said he was inclined to support it. Maybe he was just being nice to Keir Starmer, who was there in the Oval Office. You know, he can be nice to people in the Oval Office. And I have to say, I'm very surprised, having spoken to some people who are cabinet members.
You said 3 members of the cabinet. I've spoken to Peirce about this, and I think our chance. So you've got some inside track here.
Yeah.
Why has he changed his mind, Mr. Farage?
Well, I think the point is this. They probably think the Brits are going to do this anyway. That the Brits are desperate to get rid of the Chagos Islands for some sort of student politics type reason. And that if Britain are going to get rid of it anyway, then this is the best of a bad job. What I've also heard, not mentioned before, is one thing I have been told by senior Americans, is they will not be paying a penny. So if they probably think, if we've got use of the base for a long time, if the Brits are going to pay the bill, then okay, fine. They've also got Pierre, they've got bigger fish to fry. You know, Chagos has not been high up on Donald Trump's agenda for obvious reasons. I will just make one last point, which is the repayments. 9 billion is agreed. No one disputes that we're paying 9 billion to give away what we own already. But the sums are ridiculous. If it's 90 million a year for 99 years, and inflation runs at 3% over that period, that is £52 billion. Quite astonishing.
Just to pick up on Pierre's question, though, President Trump did say, I have a feeling it's the deal. I have a feeling it's going to work out very well. That is contrary to everything you said, Nigel Farage.
No, I said there are some people very, very worried in America about the deal. I am surprised, but hey, do you know what? It's not over yet.
What do you mean by that?
He said we are inclined to support.
You think there could be a change?
I think there could be a change, and I very much hope there is.
How concerned are you that 9 billion, and I take on board when you allow for inflation, it rises and all of it, but that could come out of the extra funds that have been found for the defence within the last week or so, and every time I ask any senior member of the government, is that going to come out of the MOD budget that sees the rise, they refuse to answer my question, including the Defence Secretary.
Yeah, I mean, Keir Starmer got in a bit of a mess at question time last week over this, didn't he? Is the proposed increase 6 billion a year, or is it 13 billion a year, when clearly the 13 figure included what was projected already? 90 million a year, I suppose the truth of it is that for the first few years we won't really notice. It's once inflation starts to compound that the sum is going to become enormous.
And you get to 52 billion. Pierre, thanks for opening the bowling. Alex is in Edinburgh. Alex, your question. Morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Nigel.
Morning.
Good morning. I was wondering about your opinion on Trump and Vance's treatment of President Zelensky. I was wondering if you think that they understand the war crimes that have been committed in Ukraine, and what their opinion is, what should happen about these war crimes after the appeasement is completed. And also, do they really understand what would happen if Russia are successful in Ukraine? That these war crimes will increase on a huge basis, and Ukrainian people and infrastructure will suffer indefinitely.
Okay, Alex, let's get Mr. Farage.
I mean, you talk about appeasement. I wonder, those that are objecting, and by the way, whatever the spat that occurred between Trump, Vance and Zelensky, let's, Alex, just look at the very, very big picture to begin with, if I can. We, after 3 years of war, after the Putin invasion, and 1 million battle casualties, almost unbelievable, isn't it? 1 million battle casualties, have a situation now where we either go for a peace deal or this continues for year after year after year. I know that Boris Johnson has been the biggest sort of proponent of total war, but the truth is, and I think, Alex, this is what Zelensky will have to face up to. The truth is that the longer the war goes on, the more it suits Russia. And wars either end with a deal or they end in annihilation. What is interesting, Alex, is that before Zelensky had left the White House, he'd realised that he had overplayed his hand. Yes, of course, they bit back at him, but he had overplayed his hand. And before Zelensky even left the White House, he was willing to go back in and sign the minerals deal. So I actually think, despite a lot of nonsense that you read and hear about that meeting being the end of the world, it's all going to be a disaster, all the same stuff, by the way, we heard when he talked about Little Rocket Man a few years ago, and my button's bigger than yours, which within 2 weeks he was in North Korea. I actually think good is going to come of Friday. Zelensky is going to sign the deal. And the real worry I've got, Alex, isn't about appeasement. It's about how do we put together a security package that absolutely makes sure that Putin can't do this again. And I think we're edging in the right direction.
Just to clarify, do you agree that the President and Vice President bullied President Zelensky?
I think President Zelensky was very unwise to tell the Americans what would happen to them if they didn't back him. I think it was unwise. Yeah, sure, Vance and Trump bit back, but I think in diplomatic terms, I think Zelensky played it very badly. And it's very interesting that even Peter Mandelson, the British ambassador, is making very, very similar points.
Well, he's suggesting Zelensky should return to Washington.
He will. And he will. Mandelson is right. And he will. I think what came out of Friday...
You don't see anything intemperate in Trump's language at all?
Whether there was or whether there wasn't, we're heading towards peace. We're heading towards peace. It's a good thing,
would
not
you
a bad
treat
thing.
a guest like that?
I wouldn't expect a guest to be rude to me in my own house. Absolutely not. I would expect a guest to treat me with respect. Doesn't mean that, for a minute, that Vance and Trump, I'm not defending what they did. But
so you are critical of what they did, Mr. Farage?
Do we want peace?
Of course we
or
want
should
peace,
we spend weeks
but
talking about what happened?
You did say you wouldn't defend what they did, so you wouldn't behave in that fashion.
I try not to.
What does that mean? So you might.
Nick, this is irrelevant. This is where we all go wrong. We're all focusing on the row that happened. Maybe the row was bound to happen anyway. Zelensky wasn't ready. Maybe for this, and perhaps the Americans weren't ready for it either. I don't know.
Is it right a journalist asked him why he's not wearing a suit?
Well, do you know what? If I turned up at the White House, I'd make sure I was wearing a suit and my shoes were cleaned. Absolutely. And Trump is... And, in diplomacy, our Prime Minister...
Winston Churchill.
Our Prime Minister... but he wasn't dealing with President Trump. Our Prime Minister was briefed and briefed and briefed as to how to deal with the visit to the White House.
But that's not Zelensky's fault, is it?
All right, if Zelensky wants to bowl in and show no respect to a man who we all know is incredibly old-fashioned about this stuff, and he really
When
is.
you say this stuff, you mean manners, dress,
Very
shoes?
much so.
So your shoes have to be shined. It's like being back at school.
Lots of times, Trump said, good shoes, great shoes, whatever. That's how he... So if you're going in with a positive mindset, maybe Zelensky should have thought about that. But that's minor. That's minor.
So you are critical of him wearing his battle fatigues, effectively?
I think there are times to wear it and there are times not to, perhaps.
You mentioned Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, did anybody reach out to you from his team prior to that meeting with President Trump as to what might work and what might not work?
No.
How would you characterise what Sir Keir Starmer got right?
Well, he was respectful of the president. That's important. As I say, Trump is quite old-fashioned in all of these things. He really genuinely is. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing either. He was respectful. I think... Do you know what's really happened over the last few days?
Tell me.
Is we've actually seen a British Prime Minister viscerally opposed to Brexit, wanting to have a second referendum, now benefiting as Prime Minister enormously from Brexit, because, actually, it was really interesting that on Saturday night, Downing Street put out a statement, and they said, ahead of the summit that happened yesterday in London, and Downing Street itself said, because of the UK's unique position, with regards to Europe. Basically, because we're not part of the European Union, we're not tied to their foreign policy decisions in any way at all, which we were before we left. So it's been it just shows you that actually Brexit's made us stand taller on the world stage. And let's be fair, I think in terms of the White House visit, the summit yesterday, the attempt to be a broker, in a sense, between America, Europe, Ukraine. I mean, let's face it, it's been quite a good few days for him.
President Trump said Sir Keir was a tough negotiator. Is he right?
Well, I don't know what happened in that room, but this is classic of Trump, isn't it? Oh my God, he was so tough, so tough. Whether he was or not, I don't know. I mean, look.
Is it a playbook?
Again,
does Trump have a playbook he goes to in that showdown with Zelensky? Is it almost like calling the plays in an American football team?
Well, I think,
I don't know. You do. You've been with him in good times and bad. That's why I'm asking.
This guy does stuff that nobody else can understand. He is unlike any other politician we've seen in modern times. He is wholly unconventional. But you know what? With these negotiations, he's always 2 or 3 moves ahead of everybody else. And that's why to comment constantly on the latest thing Trump has said or done is ludicrous. I mean, look, he called Zelensky a dictator, I had the whole...
You've already addressed that.
I had the whole of the media pack. And then when he's asked about it, did I say that? Did I really? The old saying about taking him seriously but not literally is true. I'm going to repeat the point. We are close to a negotiation.
You think we're closer to peace as a result of Friday afternoon?
Very much so. Because Zelensky has had to wake up and smell the coffee, as Lord Mandelson has very clearly pointed out.
We must move on. Just lastly, there are political movements afoot that the state visit that was offered to Donald Trump should now be postponed. John Swinney, the First Minister of Scotland, and others. Your view on that?
Yeah, 1 or 2 Conservatives saying the same thing. Yeah, of course. Look, these people can't abide Trump. They can't live with Trump. They don't understand Trump. They hate Trump. They always have. And let's face it, the Foreign Secretary hates Trump. Half the cabinet hates Trump. But they've got to face reality. And
state visit stays.
Of course it does. And look, whether you like Trump or not is irrelevant. He is in a very powerful position in America. We are. By the way, I don't agree with everything Trump does or says. Of course I don't. But without America, we are defenseless. And in terms of economics, if we think tying ourselves ever closer to an economically failing European Union, rather than understanding and embracing some of the things that America is doing, I think we're making a very, very big mistake.
Let's get to more of your calls. I'm sorry I've taken too much of your time. Julia's in Bromley. Julia, you're through to Nigel Farage. Go ahead. Morning to you.
Good morning. So my question is, why did you say that Andrew Tate is an important voice for emasculated young men? And that's a quote I've taken from yourself.
Yeah, it's funny. I said this, and then I had that Beth Rigby woman from Sky News saying, "Oh my God, you said that Andrew Tate is an important influence for young men." I said, well, it didn't mean that I supported him. I was making a comment. So in the end, I got so frustrated, Julia. I said, you're quite right to Sky News. Andrew Tate has no followers and no influence whatsoever. And this is one of the problems with trying to have a rational, nuanced national debate on anything. Tate has become a powerful voice for many young men. Julia, I am not saying that is a good thing. But I'm not surprised in some ways that some of these things are happening. When we were playing football in Germany recently, England fans were told, don't sing, don't chant, and don't drink more than 2 pints. I mean, we're telling young men not to be men. We're almost emasculating young men, and so they're looking for other role models. Do you understand, Julia, the point that I'm making?
Well, let's bring Julia in. Julia, do you... I'm glad you said Mr. Farage. Julia.
Okay, so I think that it's conflating a lot of issues here. I don't think that many people would have an issue with men or women shouting at football matches, but I do think that Andrew Tate has openly said that it's okay to hit and choke young women to keep them in their place. He also talks about smashing up their belongings, breaking them down psychologically in order to control them. These are things that he openly says.
He also says women are intrinsically lazy. There's no such thing as an independent female. Mr. Farage, why would you be seen to offer any form of support to comments?
I'm not. Can we all grow up?
His was a campaign, this is your words, his was a campaign of raising awareness. His was a campaign of giving people perhaps a bit of confidence at school or whichever it was to speak up. Those are words of support, aren't they?
I am identifying, honestly, a phenomenon. The Tate thing is a phenomenon, and I agree with Julia. There's some very dark stuff. Not very far away from the surface. You just dig a little bit and you find it.
Allegedly, just in case. Go ahead.
But I'm just saying, Julia, everyone knows that this guy has an enormous following that he's built up. Russell Brand, equally, has an enormous following that he's built up. I'm not supporting it, I'm identifying it.
Julia, thank you. We will move on. Fox, is it Fox in Cardiff? Hello, Fox. Good morning.
Hi, Nick. Morning.
Yes, Fox, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions, or two-part question. I wanted to ask Nigel if he regrets speaking at the CPAC conference in America after Steve Bannon did a Nazi salute, and also whether he would recognise that Elon Musk and Steve Bannon are doing a Nazi salute, or does he think they're just giving their heart out?
No regret speaking at CPAC. Good Lord, I've been going to CPAC, Fox, since 2013. I've been almost every year.
Just explain what CPAC is.
Sorry, I apologise. It's a big Conservative Political Action Committee conference that takes place in Maryland, just outside DC. It was funny, 2013 I was the only foreign speaker at CPAC. Now it's become a big international conference with centre-right views.
But
and
not
some
Jordan
right.
Bardella, if I'm saying that correctly, the French far-right leader who cancelled his visit after Steve Bannon yelled, fight, 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 and was said to give a Nazi salute. But you were still happy to go there, Mr. Farage.
Well, I spoke before that. So Bardella was due to speak after it, and he withdrew. I spoke the day before. It's a big conference. It's an important conference. As for Musk and Bannon, both of whom I know, Steve I know very well, I think what Bannon was doing was frankly taking the mickey out of Musk, because Musk had done something similar to that just after the inauguration. Are they Nazi salutes? I don't think they are for a moment.
What are they then, Mr. Farage?
Unwise. Very unwise.
But they are attempted Nazi salutes.
It's worth remembering that Musk and Bannon are at war with each other, and I think what Bannon was doing was taking the mickey out of Musk. But Fox, listen, I cannot be responsible for the behaviour of everybody that went to the CPAC conference.
But they are attempting Nazi salutes.
Well, they're not really Nazi salutes because they're out to the side, not in front. I mean, look, we could drill down on it. Do I think Musk's a Nazi? No.
All right. You're uncomfortable with what Zelensky wore to the White House.
Yeah.
It's all right for Mr. Musk to throw in sneakers, a baseball cap and a chainsaw.
I know.
But that's permissible.
Well, Musk isn't negotiating with Trump, and Musk isn't asking for billions of dollars from Trump, and Musk isn't asking for military support from Trump, and Musk isn't asking for Trump to make sure that Putin actually genuinely is stopped in the future. So there is a fundamental difference.
Fox, thank you. Samantha's in Elstree. Samantha, you're through to Nigel Farage. Go ahead.
Hello, hi. What I wanted to ask was the Gaza documentary, which was aired by the BBC, contains some pretty serious issues, effectively airing forms of Hamas propaganda, misleading translations. Whilst the BBC has acknowledged this issue, I would like to know, do you believe that the licence fee should be suspended pending an independent investigation to the BBC?
Well, many times over the years we've talked about the BBC, we've talked about the fact they preach impartiality and often don't actually conduct impartiality. I thought for some time, Samantha, that there was a really quite strong anti-Israel bias at the BBC across a fair bit of its coverage on many, many programmes. I think this particular documentary, frankly, it's shameless that they should have done this. The 13-year-old boy, whether he was being used for propaganda purposes, we can never quite say. Samantha, I think you shouldn't suspend the licence fee over one programme, however egregious that programme might be. But do we in 2025 need a grown-up debate about what the BBC is actually for, and whether we should be paying that licence fee, and whether we should go to prison if we don't pay it? Yeah, we need to have that debate. I mean, look, I will say this. For all my criticisms of the BBC, and goodness gracious me, I've personally had to bear the brunt of a fair bit of it over the years. The one thing we must remember is the BBC is a very important part of our global brand, and therefore things like the World Service actually genuinely do matter. So I would like to see a BBC that is there, out there in the world, as a representative of this country, perhaps broadcasting from places where there are censorship of all kinds, as historically it's done, But for the rest of it, frankly, whether it's sport or entertainment or whatever it is, there's no need for a BBC whatsoever. But what I will say is this. There's one really good story today in the newspapers. It's a happy story. So let's talk about a happy story for 30 seconds. Nick couldn't find it, but it's there. It's Emily Damari. Emily Damari, the British hostage, and she's now having surgery done to patch up the botch job done by Dr. Hamas, as she called him.
And she's the young woman who lost 2 fingers in the attack of October 7th, Nigel Farage.
She was the only British hostage in captivity, and it was as if no one even knew she was there. And I did work quite hard to try and raise the profile of the fact that there was a British hostage, and after all she's been through, 471 days of captivity, you know, some pretty brutal, nasty injuries, all that she's been through, and there she is in today's newspapers, smiling, an inspiration, and maybe a little bit of proof that in the end, good triumphs over evil.
Well said. Just lastly on the subject of the documentary, and you mentioned BBC Sport, to those who would say, including Gary Lineker, that the documentary should stay in place because it is some form of record in a region where it's very difficult to get, well, it's impossible actually to get journalists. What would you say to Mr. Lineker and others?
Well, he's part of the BBC bias, has been for years. Thank goodness he's finally going.
And the sight of Hamas when they return the hostages, or in one, I've not spoken to you since then, and there seems to be no shortage of young Hamas fighters ready to continue the conflict, and on one instance they actually returned the remains of the wrong body. Again, I've not heard you on this, Mr. Farage.
No, I mean, I think those scenes when the hostages are released are frankly quite repulsive. You know, masked, thousands of people chanting. I can't imagine. I mean, I'm sure some of those hostages think, goodness me, we've got this far. Are we even going to make it through the next 5 minutes? Absolutely awful.
Let's move to some that are on the text and the tweets. Rachel in Bexley. Is Sir Keir Starmer in danger of selling out our AI? Andrew Lloyd Webber and everyone else says they're playing with the intellectual properties. What does Nigel Farage think? What does Mr. Farage think? This AI row, you'll be familiar with this.
You know, I am. I mean, look, AI is a bit like the nuclear bomb. We'd rather it hadn't been invented in some ways, but it has, and it's not. That is not going to be reversed. So we, as a country, have to get in the vanguard of this. And what's really interesting, and having talked to some quite big players in America in this area, is what Britain's really good at is producing talent, brilliant young brains. You know, young men and women who are geniuses at mathematics, physics, you name it. And you know what happens? They all leave. They all go elsewhere around the world, particularly the west coast of America. So let's embrace the AI revolution as to how we put the right safeguards in place that help people producing music, journalists, radio show hosts. I mean, we can all be replaced by AI ultimately. So it does present a massive challenge, but equally for Britain, a big opportunity. And we seem to be just lagging on all of these things. You'll see overnight that Trump has talked more about crypto and crypto reserves in America. I mean, we had an opportunity in London to be one of the world's centres for sensibly regulated crypto trading. We haven't taken it up. It's the same with AI. We as a country have to get into this tech space, have to be a global leader in it, but I fully understand that safeguarding is going to be a big issue.
All right, one more before we come back to the calls. This comes from Peirce in Kent. Can Nigel Farage give us an update on the scores on the doors? Have the Conservatives now overtaken them, or is Reform still bigger? Scores on the doors.
Wow. Poor old Kemi, who at 5 o'clock on Boxing Day afternoon, and I don't know quite what state she was in mentally, but put out this ridiculous, you know, Reform haven't overtaken our membership. Farage is fiddling the figures. Well, the funny thing is, we use a system called Nation Builder to measure our membership, the same one she uses, so maybe her figures are fake. Do you know what? We've been one of the great joys, travelling around the country, and I was in Cornwall last week, I was in Yorkshire last week, and I'm travelling a lot in the next couple of months, is people are giving their 25 quids and joining.
Right. Are you still ahead of the Conservatives?
Well, they had 131,680 ballots that went out last year in the leadership election. I'm told their membership now is probably not even 100,000. When I last looked last night at our live ticker, we were on 218,000, so it's been great.
Let's go back to those calls. Nigel's in Uxbridge. You're through to Nigel Farage. Go ahead, Nigel. Morning.
Hello, morning. My question is, given your strong stance on immigration, what concrete measures have you implemented to address the significant dependence of the NHS, the care sector, and universities on migrant workers and students, of which is going to collapse without these people.
I keep hearing that, and here's the problem, Nigel. Here is the problem. Of the last 3 million people, the last 3 million that came into the country and settled during the Conservatives' time, only 22% are working. If everyone, Nigel, that came into Britain worked, and in most cases earned a reasonable salary and paid tax, then the argument we can't survive without immigration might hold. Truth is, the more people that come, the poorer we get per capita, and the figures over the last couple of years are quite extraordinary on this.
But I wouldn't wish it on you, but if you had to go into an A&E department or into a hospital, my sense is that without these workers, the hospital wouldn't function. I know that's anecdotal, and it's not dating.
And without a 10 million rise in population, we might be able to get GP appointments. It works both ways, Nick. This cuts both ways. 10 million is the increase in our population down to migration over the last 20 plus years. So it cuts both ways. By the way, the other thing that I think has been shocking, getting back to Nigel's point, is we've not been training enough nurses, we've not been training enough doctors, we've actually willfully been underproducing our own people in the medical profession. And then what we do, we take nurses from Mauritius and countries like that, where they're probably more badly needed than they are here.
All right, those are the figures, Nigel. Thank you. Nigel Farage. William in Alloa in Scotland. William, you're through to Nigel Farage. Go ahead.
Good morning, Nigel. My question to you is as follows, Nigel. Is it now time for you to resign as leader of reform? You've got it going. You've got some good support, but as Elon Musk has said, you've just not got it. I voted for reform, Nigel, here in Scotland. My parents voted for reform. A lot of my friends voted for reform, but a lot of us we feel that you are the establishment, even though you present yourself as against the establishment. And I'm a lockdown skeptic, Nigel. So I want a reckoning.
Can I just ask you, why would you say Mr. Farage? I'm intrigued. Why does he represent? Because I think a lot of people would say anything but. Why does he represent the establishment in your eyes, William?
Well, he represents himself as not, but he represents the establishment because we see the little things, because we see in Parliament Nigel's having a little chin wag with Keir Starmer, so you don't really represent us. You pretend that you do.
Let's get to Mr. Farage.
William, you didn't vote for me, did you? It's very nice to hear from you. Have a lovely day.
You're not going to take on board the question. You should stand down. You don't see yourself as an establishment. You completely rebuff everything William has said.
I can't help it if the Prime Minister bounds across the chamber and wants to have a joke.
Do you find it easy to talk with Sir Keir?
I have no personal enmity or animosity towards him whatsoever, and I don't think he does to me either. We just happen to have fundamentally different worldviews on virtually everything.
If you had to get trapped in a lift, would you want to get trapped with Kemi Baden or Sir Keir Starmer?
I think I'd force open the door and climb down the lift shaft.
Just come back to events in the United States and Ukraine. There have been calls from some senators suggesting that President Zelensky should resign. This could be the way of bringing about peace. Nigel Farage?
Well, you must have elections. That's absolutely clear.
Now?
We must have elections as soon as there is a peace deal on the table, a credible peace deal on the table. Then the best way for the Ukrainian population to discuss that deal and the shape of that deal is to have an election. All right? Very, very important. It's not just for one man and the current elected parliament.
Do you think he's a roadblock now, then, in a sense, President Zelensky?
Do you know, if I try to put myself in a really neutral position on this, it must have been psychologically very tough for him to turn up at the White House and to have to accept that the Crimea is not going back to Ukraine. That psychologically, as a leader, and that's how history shows you, can't be easy. All right. So I'm saying that from a totally neutral perspective. I'm not a huge fan of Ukraine. It's a very, very corrupt country, etc. But I do understand that there must be elections.
You're not a fan of the treatment it's receiving at the moment from Putin?
No, of course not.
No, just
far from it.
Just to clarify,
far from it. I mean, of course.
So he arrives at the White House. He's not getting crap.
And I can see psychologically why he was in a tough place, but he wasn't able to adapt and adjust, and he got a bit shirty, and boom, the American leaders bit back. But now he's being realistic. I think I think both Mandelson and myself are saying, look, we just have to get real here. This has happened. The Crimea is not going back to Ukraine. It's just a fact of life. That's where we are, and this bloody war must end, but end in a way that stops Putin ever doing it again. And I think all of that is beginning to take shape.
So that punch-up in the White House is always going to happen?
Looking back on it, yes. Why? Maybe not quite as spectacularly as it did.
Why did it last? You know them. Why did Trump want to dust up?
I don't think...
Does he like a fight? Does he prefer a fight to a feast?
sometimes it's only after a fight you get good reconciliation. And I'm sure many times in his business dealings he's had terrible rows with people, only 48 hours later to sign an agreement.
Nigel Farage, thank you for your time. It's a pleasure welcoming to the studio. Leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage, appearing on LBC. It's 9:31. News headlines then. Thomas Watts.